everyone, I'm Mia McCormick, and we are so honored to have cinematographer Polly Morgan with us today for our Women of Influence interview. The American Society of Cinematographers named her a rising star, and she recently, earlier this year, was one of the youngest ever to be invited to join the BSC. Polly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So you started out with a background in art history, right? I mean, how did that lead to cinematography?
As a young girl, I was always just a massive fan of movies. And then when I was 13, I was lucky enough to experience a film crew coming to our farmhouse and using it as base camp. You know, they let me look through the camera, and it really was then that my love of cinematography was born. Then I went on to study art history, and from there I just really decided that, you know, the combination of having a love of movies and storytelling, a love of art and a love of photography, I really knew that, you know, my route was really into cinematography.
So how do you approach your narrative projects then, setting mood and tone?
Well, the first thing that I look at is the script. What type of story are we telling? Are we telling a dramatic story, a comedic story, a thriller? What we'll then do in pre-production is the director and I will spend a couple of weeks together and we'll break down the script and we'll talk about the emotional arc of the characters and really how are we visually going to represent that emotional arc through the visuals. These days, I think a more modern approach to lighting has been softer light. Now that we have more sensitive cameras and we don't have to worry like they did 100 years ago on very slow film stocks, we don't have to light with very strong hard light. There's a whole lot of new technology that really helps us tell the stories that we want to tell in a different way with less challenges that they had 100 years ago.
Yeah, you cut your teeth on some major films like V for Vendetta and Inception.
Yeah, I mean, my background in the film business really started as a production assistant. In the UK, that's called a runner. And it then moved forward to becoming a camera trainee and then a clapper loader, which is known as a second AC here in the US. And I think actually as a camera assistant and even as a production assistant, it takes a lot for you to learn the skill to be a really top class assistant, even in itself. For me, that experience of working my way up from the bottom, you know, spending hours labeling cases and making filter labels and doing all of that, it really just taught me to respect every crew member. It taught me to be patient while I'm at work, because everybody's job on set is so important and it takes a crew of people to make a film. It's not just being an artist. You also have to be a manager and you have to be a leader. It's just a juggle of like how to get the best out of people, how to deal with difficult personalities, you know, how to be sort of like a collaborator and how to be a mediator. And these are the things that I think you just learn as you go. If people see the people that they are working for get stressed out or lose their cool, I think then it really just creates an atmosphere which is not a conducive one to do good work.
So you've clearly learned to respect other people. Have you had issues with anybody respecting you?
I mean, I think I've had people maybe not disrespect me, but maybe treat me in a way which I would not choose to be treated. For example, when I was a production assistant, my very first job was as an in-house runner at RSA, which is Ridley Scott's commercial production company in Soho in London. And I would always say good morning to the producers on the stairways or whatever, and often I wouldn't get a good morning back. And I decided back then, you know, as a young woman, that I would never treat somebody that way. I think that as a female, my journey has been easier than some of the women that have led the way before me. I know that possibly now, the women that are climbing up the ladder as young female cinematographers now, I'm sure that maybe they're having a slightly easier time than what I had. But I think it's perceptions and the idea that you don't have to just be a man to be able to be an artist or to be a photographer or to tell a story. We can all tell stories, and we all tell stories in an individual way because we are all unique in the fact that we're artists because of our background and the experiences we've had and where we come from.
You know that, but do you think that the industry knows that?
I remember when I was a PA speaking to some older male technicians, and they were saying to me that they remember when women first became producers. I think it was the production department that women first entered into, and it became a place where they could be respected and seen as equals to men. But I do know, as a young PA, older men in the more technical roles, they had a sort of, they didn't like to be told what to do by a female. The film business has just been a slower uptake into equality than most other industries. Women are challenged by the role because it's a very all-encompassing role. When I started my journey to be a cinematographer, digital acquisition was not available. It was just film. We just shot on film. And when I was working my way up through the department in the UK, I was working with camera operators that had started sweeping the floor in the big film studios. And so there was this hierarchical process where you started off at the bottom and you climbed up slowly, one by one, up the ladder. And as you moved on, you would take the person that was your assistant with you, and then they would climb up the ladder along with you. As a female, you could start that journey, but if you wanted to go and have a family, it became impossible for you to balance the two together. These days, I think with the advent of digital cameras, it's become a lot easier because you really don't need to be an apprentice, you don't need to be an assistant. There's many different ways for you to start your journey into cinematography.
It makes it an exciting time for young women.
I think now is a really exciting time for women that want to get into the film business and to be cinematographers or to be directors, because I think people have really taken a look and noted that the balance of those people that are telling stories is so heavily swayed one way that the young people that are growing up and that are shaped by the films that they are watching in the cinemas or at home, if those stories that are being told are just being told by this small segment of society, is that a really good indication of the world's stories?
You know, just like photographers, I feel like cinematographers each have a voice. Where do you think your voice, like what scripts, what productions do you think your voice is the clearest?
I'm just ever evolving. You know, I think as I have grown up, knowing what I wanted to do and just being so focused on achieving my dream. Now, being so blown away by the fact that I'm actually doing what I always dreamt of, now I actually have the moment to sit back and be like, okay, actually, who am I? And what stories do I want to work on? And what stories do I want to help tell? So I think it's an ever-evolving thing. I think the stories that really excite me are the stories that are really representative of the human experience. The pain and suffering, or the joy and the love, and all these things that we all go through as people.
You shoot both fiction and documentary styles. What changes for you in structure and pace and that kind of thing?
I think I've been incredibly fortunate in that I managed to shoot commercials, TV, feature films, and documentaries.
Yeah, everything.
And that being said, it means that you're working with a variety of budgets, and you're working with a variety of crew size and a variety of time. Documentaries, for me, was something that has taken me some time to really master. Storytelling, lighting, creating the emotion and the tone that we've talked about, that was my forte. To do something where you're working so quickly and you're running and gunning and you're just trying to capture what's happening and you've only got one shot, and then knowing that you have to cover the scene for it to make sense, all of that, it's a very intense experience to be a documentary cinematographer. And I take my hat off to those people that, do it all the time, because it's incredibly challenging and remarkable.
Do you feel like with each different production that you get into a different mindset for it?
It's a very fascinating experience working on different genres. It's something that I really didn't anticipate, but when I was working on American Horror Story, for example, the content that I was working on became so ingrained in my psyche that I would lie awake at night and get up and go and check that the windows were closed. And I think when you're working, for example, on a horror production, maybe it's because of the atmosphere that you create. Maybe it's because the artists have to put themselves in a very dark place. But the overall atmosphere on set is very different to, for example, working on a comedic production, where those experiences have always been the most fun and the least stressful.
The look that you're trying to portray is very clear, and I feel like that voice is crystal clear. What helps you hone that?
I think each different film needs a different approach. It's a different story, it's a different director, and I think it's all about just doing whatever is needed for that specific story.
Can you leave us with some advice for young professionals looking to get into cinematography?
I mean, I think that the one thing about cinematography is you don't want the viewer to be aware of it. You don't want someone to watch a film and say, oh, the film was terrible, but wow, that's cinematography. Because my job is to serve the story. My job is not to make beautiful imagery. Sometimes beautiful imagery just doesn't apply. You know, if you're working on a commercial and you're selling a product, yes, make the most beautiful imagery you can. If you're telling a story, how do you want the viewer to feel? You know, and I don't think you should be afraid of pushing things. I think be brave, be bold. And I think just remember always what story you're telling.